heart is weakened, though inside a fire burns. For the devil is her lover when Dracula returns. She took a demon for her lover as Dracula returns. She took a demon for her lover as Dracula returns. From Dacre, Stoker, and Chris McAuley, Dracula returns. Critical blast logistics, getting it done, getting it there. Critical blast logistics, getting it done, getting it there.
The Immortal Mask, a 1970s superhero crime noir adventure, follows a retired soldier turned reporter who is given a coveted interview with a death row inmate. What he learns thrusts him into Atlanta's shadowy underworld. He'll have to use his military training to survive being hunted for possessing the information that could topple the city's most powerful ruling class. This is not a pre-order or a crowdfunding campaign. Get your books now at denali's.com.
Madness Entertainment Group presents the Madness Comic Network with original programming and additional comic-related content.
I was sitting all alone in my library chair when I found a book and it gave me a scare. The pages I kept turning, it quite took me in. What was it? Oh, where do I begin? We read the monsters. I read the monsters next door. The monsters. It had short stories galore. The monsters. It's full of horror and gore. The monsters. I read the monsters next door. Oh, 25 seconds to curtain, folks.
It's a Critical Blast podcast. Special guest, Dacre, Stoker, and Chris McAuley.
That takes forever to play. Somebody should have told Bach to speed that one up. Hello, everybody. I am RJ Carter, Senior Managing Editor here at criticalblast.com. And tonight's an interesting night because I know we always have interesting people. They're comic book creators. They're some of the most interesting people in the world. If you don't believe them, just ask them. But this one's a little bit different. We have a team here, Dacre, Stoker, and Chris McAuley, who have a book on Zoop. Already it's different. See? We surprise you. Called Dracula, The Return, The Cult of the White Worm. This is issue 1, and yeah, mine is signed. You should be so lucky. And issue number 2 is what we're funding tonight, and possibly there might be a way to get issue number 1 on there. Dacre, Chris, welcome to the show.
RJ, thanks for having us on Critical Blast. I got to tell you, that's one of the coolest intros, all those videos. We're very well connected out there in the comic world. We are in the right place to help pursue funding, crowdfunding for Dracula Return, Cult of the White Worm issue 2. I tell you, this is going to be a great evening. I hope so.
I've actually had campaigns go backwards when they come on my show. People refund it. So, you know, I'm a little bit cursed. It's not from these folks, so it's not from Will out there at Creators Outlet. Hail, nerds and pendejos. He's talking to me on that last bit there because he knows me well. And we got Mike Walters out here who's dropped in to like and share and say hi, and we do appreciate that. We do ask people to share the stream. I don't care if you like it. Don't. I'm not going to ask you to like it. That's not in me. But do share it because we do want your friends to see what's going on here because this may be something that they like. You know, and given who's here and who their friends are, I know it. I know this is something they will like. So Dacre, let's just address the elephant in the room right away, because your name's not a coincidence, and you're writing a Dracula book. Can you just give the provenance one more time?
One more time. Well, okay. So Bram Stoker is my great granduncle. Bram was one of 7 children, born in 1847, and his youngest brother George, my great grandfather. So that's why I'm the great grandnephew. So very cool to be connected to the family, and really happy to be carrying on his legacy. And if it wasn't for the guy sitting next to me, an Irishman from Edmonton, Alberta, we would not be continuing the legacy in the manner in which we are. It's my buddy Chris McAuley. We created something called Stoker Verse, which has lots of interesting products continuing sort of Bram's stories, bits and pieces left out of his thought process, out of his writing process, not just Dracula, but his other books as well. And the Stoker Verse is pushing big things tonight, and that is Dracula, The Return, a graphic novel, issue number 2. Issue number 1 was great success, and we need people to learn about issue number 2, because Chris and I have done some really cool things in the writing. Chris and our publishers have lined up some really cool artists, so you got lots to hear about tonight. But RJ, yeah, that's who I am and why we're here tonight.
Right, so Chris, can you tell us how you got hooked up with this guy here, and just did the obvious thing, which was, you know, take the family legacy and put it back out there in new form?
Well, yeah, it's an interesting story. I was writing a horror comic for an anthology, and it was, you know, it was going to be Dracula in space, essentially. So the title was Dracula, Lord of the Future. So what happened in the comic was that a Weyland-Yutani style company comes, takes the remains of Dracula, puts it up on a space station, chains him up, subjects him to horrible experimentation for evil, capitalistic, you know, pharmaceutical gains, right? But in the midst of all of this torture, Dracula's thinking back on all the encounters he's had with humans, you know, from the Crusades to Van Helsing to World War I, and he says, you know, I've always been accustomed to violence, but never such indignity. With that one line, he's done philosophizing. He gets out and he kills everybody in the space station. It's just bloodbath, gore, all of that. And then he jumps into a space shuttle and flies off to God knows where. So I sent a message to the Bram Stoker estate because, you know, I'm very respectful of Bram Stoker's works. And sent an email and said, look, here's the script. Here's the art. It was actually from a 2000 AD artist, a guy called Colin Maxwell. And, if you don't want me to use Dracula, that's fine. I can use another make up a vampire name. The next, I think it was a couple hours later, Dacre asked if he could call me. And we set up a meeting, a bit of an informal chat. We started talking about bringing Bram Stoker's short stories to comic book format. So the first thing we did was The Virgin's Embrace, which is an update of Bram Stoker's, now unfortunately titled The Squaw. And I do apologize for anybody listening that takes offense at that title. But we renamed it to The Virgin's Embrace. We put all sorts of extra things in there from Dacre's family knowledge and history. And then we moved on. We did audio dramas. We did an audio drama together with Doctor Who actors and Hollywood actors. We did a novel together with John Peel, who's quite a famous Doctor Who author. And then branched out into comics with Dracula Return.
So the other stuff wasn't comics. It was just stories.
Yeah.
I can say just stories.
Virgin's Embrace was a graphic novel. But it contained a lot of family history around the story, from the Stoker archives. And our artist there was Jessica Martin, who's a Doctor Who actress. You can tell from the background I'm a bit of a Doctor Who fan. I do work in Doctor Who as well, which has been sort of my latest thing. So
back when Telos had the rights to Doctor Who, and the BBC said, "Hey, we're taking that license back." They spun off Time Hunter as a book series, and I got to write the next to the last book in that series, The Sideways Door, with my buddy Troy, and Tracy Childs got to read the audio version of that. So I'm bonding with you right now. I had something I was going to say about this. Okay, so you wrote to the Stoker estate, and you got in touch with Dacre about this, which has me asking the question about what the public domain level is with something like Dracula, because it's not an American property, so we can't just say, hey, it's greater than 70 years old. We just go with it. Laws are different everywhere. I know, like Sherlock Holmes is, ancient, but just recently sort of became a public domain. Dacre, what is the status of Dracula if people want to use it?
No, it is public domain now. So since 1962. It's public domain. So Chris did not have to do what he did, but it just shows the level of, sort of conscientious guy that he is. He wants to do things right. He's also a Freemason, as was Bram. So that's another level of wanting to do things right by fellow Freemasons. So he did contact the estate. And since my wife and I managed this for Bram's great-grandsons, it was a no-brainer to follow up and say, look, I'm interested to learn more. But what really got my attention was, because he didn't have to do it, and he was willing to say, well, is there any changes you want to make? I really would like to do it. I had been thinking just, about a couple of weeks prior to his contact, is how do we get some of Bram's other stories, other than Dracula and Dracula's Guest, out there to the world in new forms? So I've been sort of noodling around, do we re-release them in an annotated form? Is there a way to adapt them into graphic novel? And so I was thinking about it, had no idea how to do it. And he was just kind of arrived on the scene with his own comic. I liked the idea. It was, interesting reimagining, but it kept some of the original tropes. And it was like, okay, let's do this. And would you also be interested in helping me, advise me, working with me? And it turns out that he had all kinds of contacts. He's got individual skills himself, how to turn, some of Bram's narrative into the actual scripts to be turned into graphic novels. He knew people in different publishers in the graphic novel comic world. So it was just a match made in heaven. And we've actually accomplished an awful lot. Besides that, we've got an RPG game out, a board game out, and we'll talk later in the show about a video game. So all of these things, it's because Chris understands this world. He understands, me and how we want to protect, Bram's original idea and go back to the original Dracula that Bram actually created, as opposed to the much more kind of sexy teenage runway model that we see nowadays as our sort of Dracula type vampire. So all those things together have really helped bond this, friendship as well as good working partnership.
Now, all the classic vampire tropes, I believe, came from the Dracula book. I mean, the whole, stake through the heart, which wouldn't do any of us any good, really. So I don't know what's so special about that. The can't travel over running water, aversion to garlic, sunlight, all of that came from Bram.
Well, it actually came a little bit before Bram, because I've been lucky enough, and these are the type of things that Chris and I, noodle about twice a day when we're on a project, and that's where did all these things come from? And now I know from analyzing his notes that live in the Rosenbach Museum in Philadelphia, the typescript out in Seattle, Washington, but we've also found all the books that Bram used for his research in the London Library, and many of these books actually have rather naughty underlining and little check marks and things next to it. He also listed all the books he did his research in the back of his notes. So one book in particular, 2-volume set, And Beyond the Forest, has an essay on Transylvanian superstitions by a Scottish lady, Emily Gerard. So she delivered to Bram all of these superstitions and folklores from Transylvania that caused him to change the book from Austria to Transylvania, but gave him all the tropes you just mentioned, RJ. How to kill a vampire, what they can and cannot do. Funnily enough, though, it didn't mention the sunlight. That's one of the things that Bram pulled out somewhere. And look, Chris and I noodle this around. It's because, creatures of the night, the unknown, the rats, the bats, the wolves, the owls, all these things are creatures of the night. But Bram didn't have Dracula being destroyed by sunlight. That was Nosferatu who did that first. And then others have played with that in different ways. But it is kind of cool, because there's 4 pages in his notes that have all these tropes. And, about half of them he used. Others have been picked up by other people. Some of the tropes that Bram got from Emily Gerard continue today with minor variations. So it's pretty cool to see the origin of them all.
Yeah. So Chris, with the aversion to sunlight, and I guess it's not going to turn him into ash, because that's not canon. But if Dracula's on a space station orbiting the Earth, is there no sunset or no sunrise? Which one is it?
Well, why do you think that vampires are afraid of the crucifix? I always ask this question.
Because it's got a really long end and you can stab them with it. I
think Peter Cushing actually did that in one of the films. You're right, he did. Okay, the crucifix is a symbol of the equinox of the sun. When Christ was crucified on that particular shape of wood, he wouldn't have been, by the way, it would have been a sort of an X that he would have been crucified on. But the reason we use that is because it symbolizes the equinox of the sun. That's what the aversion is to the crucifix. It's the symbolism of the sun. When Christ dies, the sun disappears as well in the Bible. So you have the solar god being Christ. So it as long as you've got a handy 2 sticks that you can sort of put together, there's a little bit of an aversion to that, I think.
It would seem like perpendicular lines exist all over the place in nature. It would just kind of have him making very arduous paths around things.
Yeah, well, there's reasons why the vampires can't cross running water. A lot of the mythology about Dracula comes from Irish folklore. It doesn't come all from Eastern European folklore. So the whole idea of an ashwood stake going through the heart of a vampire actually comes from an Irish legend called Abertach. And Abertach was a diminutive wizard who was killed by an Irish chieftain, but then he came back from the dead and started to demand blood from the chieftain and his villagers, until one day they get fed up. So they stabbed him through the heart with a stake, buried him upside down under a rock, and there's a tree there, and that's a real place. You can go there, and there's all sorts of strange happenings for that place. So farmers have tried to cut down the tree. They haven't been able to. The chainsaw has stopped just as it's touched the tree. They've tried to tie a rope around the tree, put it onto the tractor. The tractor just goes off by itself. Go back even further. There's an old Irish folklore from the era of the High Kings about reptilian creatures called Fomorians, and they came over on a boat to the sea. The only way they could be killed is by stake through the heart and to have their head cut off. They were immortal creatures. That was the only way to do it. So little elements of old Irish mythology that we would believe that Bram would have taken and incorporated into Dracula.
Yeah, they're all sort of organically, absorbed into himself with stories told over the years, all other kids talking about them, even grown up. So you've got to realize that besides all the heavy duty notes he took, many other things he didn't need to take notes because he already knew this stuff. It's already around him in his world.
Yeah, one of the things I recall from the Dracula adaptation that was the Marvel Comics character, because again, I guess once it became public domain, Tomb of Dracula was a thing, and he existed alongside Spider-Man and the X-Men and everybody else. But there was a scene where he attacks the X-Men and Wolverine's like, yeah, I know how to handle this, and he makes this cross, and Dracula's like, yeah, you got to have faith, and just pummels him, and leaping right out of that encounter is when the other X-Men character Kitty Pryde tries to intervene, and he grabs her by the throat, and his hand starts to burn because she's Jewish and she's wearing a Star of David. Where does that come into the Dracula mythos? Is there an aversion to faith?
Well, I mean, the first thing I've just got to say is hats off to the writers of that comic for creating stuff like that and taking little bits of it. And there is a lot of faith in the novel Dracula, right? But there's nothing that's aversion to a Star of David. But the fact that the concept of faith is so big in Dracula that they then take that and go to the direction they want. I mean, when you really consider this, okay, Bram was a Protestant. He was practicing Protestant, went to church, got married in a church, continued to go to church all his life. But he's introducing at a time in the Victorian era when the power of the church is sort of beginning to drop off a little bit because science and the occult and superstition are beginning to rise. And this has happened, through history a lot. When science and tech and the occult begin to rise, people are wondering just what happens after death. They question the existing powers of religion. And what Bram was sort of controlling in this novel was the band of heroes who do represent a cross-section of society are bound by faith in goodness versus evil. And they are guided by religious icon. I mean, that's why the holy water repels the Dracula and the wafer and the crucifix. But that's not all. It has to be the ingenuity of Mina, the modern woman who knows how to do a typewriter, all her use of science, but also the goodness of men. And that's a really major component. So I am convinced, because RJ, I haven't read that Tomb of Dracula edition you're talking about, but I'm convinced that having said that those writers must have a pretty good knowledge of Dracula, the novel Dracula, and what Bram's getting at, to be able to adapt it that way. And I think that's brilliant.
Now, you talk about the notes that Bram took, and you at one point had your hands on the handwritten manuscript, and there were a lot of things that he, and when I say a lot, it's a hefty word count that he took out of the novel before it was published, and yeah. you did something. You did something special. You did a thing with that.
I did a thing with that, and it's something that Chris and I draw from, a couple times a week, and that is, we know that 101 pages were cut out of the typescript, the first 3 chapters. We also know we have a really good idea of what those were, because I've been able to cross-reference Dracula notes in Philly to the typescript in Washington to Bram's own journal. And I've actually written an annotated Dracula and included all those things that have been taken out. So you can go to Amazon and check out Dracula annotated for the 125th anniversary. You can see the things that Chris and I use. There's also things crossed out in the actual typescript in addition to the missing 101 pages. So we see bits and pieces that people who have read Dracula and are familiar with the novel wouldn't know about. And those are some of the cool things we use in our video games, in our RPG game, in our board games. Those are the sort of the mysterious things. Why did they come out? Well, with all the work that I've been able to do and Chris's creative mind, we use those to our advantage. I can't tell you all of them now, but I'll just tell you that there's some very interesting pieces, like a deleted ending. I'll tell you this: Dracula's guest was one of the chapters taken out. So if anybody listening wants to read a very cool short story that was once definitively part of the original Dracula manuscript, go to bramstoker.org. It is a free website. You can read any of Bram's public domain works, which are most of them, and you can go ahead and check out Dracula's guest. That is not named Jonathan Harker, the main character, but it is Jonathan Harker en route to Castle Dracula. And it's a great story. So those are some of the things to just sort of whet the appetite, but that's a lot of the info that Chris and I use in the Stokerverse to give people some really in-depth look at things Bram was thinking of putting into the novel that never survived.
Yeah, Jonathan was the one character I wasn't worried about in the entire book because he was the one writing all the letters. So, dear Mina, you won't believe what happened to me yesterday. So I'm like, well, he's not going to die because he mailed the letter.
Jonathan, I'll tell you this, Chris, actually, you go first. I've been talking before. You tell about Jonathan.
Well, here's the other thing. How do you know Jonathan mailed them when it wasn't Dracula?
We at least finished the letter.
Because he gave letters to Dracula to mail as well. There's bits of that. So, you're never too sure. No, Jonathan's an interesting character. When Dacre and I look at him, we see him as quite a heroic figure. He becomes extremely troubled after his encounters with the brides and with Dracula, but he escapes. He's one of the few people who have ever escaped Dracula's grasp. Renfield being the other one, but Renfield has escaped for a reason. Dracula has allowed him to go back for a reason. Harker was always meant to die. He was meant to be the plaything of the brides. God knows what was going to happen to that man. But he escapes, and then he does something remarkable. He confesses everything to the woman that he loves. He gets married, and he even states, he's doing it because, he obviously loves Mina, but it's obviously to consummate something that's pure and holy, and Dracula wouldn't like that. So that was him again being quite defiant. When it comes to him having to help the band of heroes, he helps them, even though he's come through a very traumatic time. When Dracula forces Mina to his chest, and this is not an erotic scene, this is a horrific scene. Dracula is an undead creature. He had his long fingernails encrusted with dirt, cuts open dead flesh, blood and pus come out. He takes Mina's head and slams up against his chest. Her face is covered with this fluid. The band of heroes break in, and he glares at Harker, shows him his wife's desecrated face, and throws the wife across the bed in a challenge to do you want her now? And what's the first thing Harker does? Runs to his wife. That's an act of heroism. It's an act of love. Yeah. That's another act of defiance against the evil of Dracula. So, we're really bringing, with Dracula Return, we're bringing in the second issue. You get to see more of Jonathan's heroism and what he's prepared to do for love.
This brings up a question that I brought up in panels on vampires and at conventions and such. And, first of all, Dracula was not the young, handsome Bela Lugosi. He wasn't, he was old. He was an old man, and yet he had these brides around him, which tells me that he had a hunger for something other than blood. He still had these desires. Otherwise, you're just keeping people around to yell at you for not picking up your socks. But despite the fact that he goes through this scene, as you just mentioned here, and that he is an undead creature, there has evolved this romance of the vampire. And you saw it in the early films. You saw it in the Hammer films, where it's like, Lucy with Senra, I guess would be the first example of this. here's this undead creature, and her reaction is, "Take me."
Well, can I challenge that for a moment?
Please.
Okay. So the brides, they're not brides. They're not the brides of Dracula. They're the weird sisters, right? So the bride stuff comes in cinematically. We don't actually know the linkage that they have with Dracula. We have the one line where it's like, I too have loved.
Right.
But that may mean something else. It's vampires, they're dead. They're dead creatures. There's an absence of sex there. If you look at Freudian analysis, they're very orally fixated. But there's
the original ones. Let's be straight.
The original ones, not the cinematic version. So the Dracula that Bram created was not interested in sex. In fact, one of the most terrifying traits is that he's not interested in love or sex or anything remotely human. He is dead physically, and when it comes to that very human emotion, sexually. But Hollywood, being Hollywood, couldn't film that. So they've got to create this romantic mythos around the monster, because there's got to be a romanticization of monsters, because that's quite, it sells. The original Dracula is nothing like that. Why he takes Lucy is a direct challenge to Van Helsing. So he knows Lucy's connection to Seward, and he knows Seward's connection to Van Helsing. When he targets Lucy, he knows Van Helsing's going to get called. And Van Helsing, in his hubris, says, I can save this woman. Dracula knows that he can't. When Lucy dies, Dracula knows that Van Helsing's only recourse is to say to these men that loved Lucy, oh, yes, she's now become one of the undead, and she's doing God knows what with these children. And the only way we can destroy her is, stake through the heart, cut the head off, and shove garlic in her mouth. So he's basically desecrating Lucy's memory in front of these men and asking these men to desecrate Lucy's body. Dracula is counting on Van Helsing feeling that the men are going to walk away from him and Van Helsing's going to be on his own. But that doesn't happen.
So one of the things, okay, that a lot of people miss, and this is what Chris is getting at, and again, we've gone over this a bazillion times. There's no question that when the novel first appeared on stage in 1922 with Edmund Kean and then later Bela Lugosi, Bram was a theater manager. He would have totally approved of this change. You did have unattractive, ugly, scary leading men on stage. People would have just walked out. So Lugosi, Edmund Blake, in his dinner jacket, looking suave and debonair, mysterious, and did have a degree of horror and mischief behind him, but he was an physically attractive person. So that ended up changing the story. Women would not have gone to the theater. Men would have not gone without their wives. You're missing half of the sort of social network in London that go to the stage. So this was an economic and a well-calculated move to adapt a book. Bram had died 10 years before, so he wasn't around to say, no, you can't do this to my book. His wife was in charge of the dramatic rights. She was working with Hamilton Dean and John Balderston. She was very well aware of they had to sell. She was out to make money. So this whole metamorphosis of the Dracula image to a more sexy, suave, debonair guy was all because of stage. And then who was standing around waiting when Universal bought the rights in 1931? Bela Lugosi, who had been so successful on stage. Boom, he's now your guy. And then it continues. Now, the only deviation was the pirated Nosferatu in 1922. The Germans were not worried about a sexy guy on stage. They immediately had Count Orlok, who looks like this rat-like creature, more like Bram's Dracula than Lugosi does. So in a funny way, even though it was a unauthorized adaptation, it was closer with the Dracula image than what came later. And then if you track all the Draculas, Chris and I were actually working on a book. Chris will tell you about later about Dracula, the history in cinema. You can see this massive humanization, sexualization, because like women buy books, women go to the theater, women drag their husbands to the theater. You've got to, appeal that way, and it certainly has. I mean, Jack Palance, Frank Langella, Gary Oldman, Christopher Lee, all these guys get better looking and have more human-like qualities, and we can go on and on. So that's how it's evolved, and why. And again, we're just out here to remind people that that's all good. Okay, it's nice, but if you want to come back to the original Man in Black, all in black, as I've described him, the original horrifying creature, come check out the Stokerverse, and you'll see. Now, it's not all boring stuff, because he does, have some interaction, obviously, with people, and he's learning how to morph a little bit and to fit in and to shape shift and and seek his revenge, but he's still a badass.
Yeah, and of course, Max Schreck looked like a real vampire, because if you've seen Shadow of the Vampire, he was one.
Of course, yeah, good call.
I love the conceit of that film. We have talked and gone into vampire lore, and we have not done the one thing that you guys are here for, and that is to tell people about Dracula the Return, Cult of the White Worm, books 1 and 2. So yes, folks, if you did miss this book here, you can still get it on this campaign, and the link to the Zoop campaign is right down there. It's always below the video when we have these kinds of shows, folks. You know that by now. So let's take a look at what is going to be in this campaign. You got 12 days left to get another $3,600. Are you nervous?
Always nervous until the check is signed. But, my buddy up above me is confident. Chris, why don't you tell them, let's just kind of share without spoilers. And we could start maybe with the teaser of the female on the front cover, and we can talk about our artist and so on. But what should we tease them to try to help raise that amount we're looking for?
Well, here's, if grab issue 1, you'll find how Dracula gets resurrected in a very authentic way, and using some of those strange notes that we've been talking about as well. So it's a very authentic way that Dracula is resurrected. The White Worm's an interesting addition as well, and the White Worms, obviously, Lair of the White Worm was another story that Bram wrote, and we've incorporated that into Dracula lore. The White Worm is Crom Cruach, the Irish god who people were sacrificed to, and the origins of Samhain, of Halloween. So we've got the White Worm in there as well. Now, one of the most interesting aspects of this comic is that Dracula was not originally based on Vlad III. Dracula was a real story that Bram Stoker wrote about someone he knew intimately. Dacre and I reveal who that person is in this issue.
Okay.
So so that's quite a historic moment in graphic novels, and that's illustrated by the artist David Hitchcock. Beautifully intricate Gothic artwork, with little hidden occult things in each of the panels for people to look at and try and guess, and lots of things in there. We also bring in a bit more of the verse in this one, so you'll get to see a Stokerverse interpretation of Sherlock Holmes, a Stokerverse interpretation of Frankenstein's creature, a Stokerverse interpretation of Jekyll and Hyde as well. So they're all in there, all written as if Bram Stoker had created them. What would have
tie in with Ripper as well?
The Ripper is part of the Stokerverse. He's in the RPG.
Okay.
So so we bring the flavor of all the things that would have surrounded Bram historically and would have influenced Bram culturally, and we bring those into issue 2.
I'm in.
Bram Stoker was really friendly with Arthur Conan Doyle. I think you could say they were best friends, really, and they were both Freemasons, and they understood the occult, they understood magic, and we've brought a version of Sherlock Holmes in there, which was the Stokerverse version. It's not quite the same as Conan Doyle's original, but we get to have fun with that. We get to have fun with Holmes interacting with Jekyll and Hyde, and again we have a very specific version of Jekyll and Hyde in there. So
I'm brought to mind of Alan Moore's League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and movie aside, way aside, the first volume was very intriguing and entertaining to have all those Victorian fictional characters brought into one adventure, including Mina Harker.
Yes, yeah, that was cool that she was included in that. So we've got another female. Chris, how much do we tell them about that cover?
Yeah, well, this is if you want to call her, she's the fourth weird sister, or you want to term it in Hollywood terms, she's the fourth bride. She's somebody that Bram wrote about, but isn't in the published version of Dracula. But it's someone
she's in the crossed out notes.
So she's somebody who is part of Dracula lore. We have taken, again, we've furthered her story. We've given her a backstory, all of that sort of stuff, and she is evil. There is nothing redeeming about this woman at all. I think in issue 1 we got a few letters from readers, and she was actually one of the creepiest parts of issue 1, and what she does, what she's doing with those children.
Oh, okay. So yeah, if she's killing kids, get the wood chipper out.
No, she's not killing them. She's fulfilling what Dracula wants to do to those children in a way that Lucy couldn't.
That sounds.
There's your hint. There's your hint.
Okay. Yeah. This is. I'm so in on this now. When I read the first book, it picks up right at the death of Dracula. Right. The whole tear him apart, bury him the way you're supposed to, and you go right into what's going to resurrect him. Now, it reads to me like you're borrowing from another person's mythos to get this involved and to move along. Am I reading that correctly, or
in what way?
You talking about Lovecraft?
Elder gods, I go one place.
Yeah,
there you go. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, Lovecraft, H.P. Lovecraft was, his idea of the cosmic gods, I've always loved, right? And the white worm, Crom Creoch, is that in Irish mythology. He's an older elder god. So if you hear the story of St. Patrick chasing serpents from Ireland, there were no snakes in Ireland, but the worship of Crom Creoch was still there. That's what Patrick destroyed. The sacrifices that took place on Samhain, all of that, the child sacrifices, all of that, Patrick removed from Ireland.
As Chris said earlier, it's a book that Bram wrote. It's the last book that he wrote just a year before he died, less than a year, as a favor to his publisher to squeeze out one more supernatural thriller. And the sad thing is, RJ, and there's people criticize the novel because it's kind of disjointed. He had had a stroke. He had lost sight in one eye. He had gone to his favorite place for the summer, Cruden Bay, Scotland. It was not easy for his wife to get him there and son because he was ailing and crippled. And to knock out this book wasn't easy. And I don't know why it wasn't properly edited, but it's not an easy book to read. Again, it's at bramstoker.org if you want to read it for free, a PDF of it. It was turned into a movie. So it's kind of a cult-like movie following. Dan Curtis did it, but we wanted to reintroduce it because, exactly as Chris said, we needed a higher god for Count Dracula to justify Count Dracula getting reanimated after he is crumbled into dust. Now, mind you, he was stabbed with a Bowie knife, not a stake. So there's an argument there for he's not totally gone, but we figured a way within Bram's own notes and things to bring him back again.
And there's no doubt that Bram Stoker would have written a sequel to Dracula. There's no doubt. I mean, if you look at what happens at the end of the book, Dracula's head isn't cut off, right? He left enough there. There's no garlic. He left enough And there's a little moment at the end of the book where there's this look of peace, or is it peace?
Yeah.
Is it defiance? Is it a little slide smirk? And that's what we looked at when we were doing this, because we didn't want to do, what had been done before. I mean, you've got a lot of the, and I like the Hammer horror films. Christopher Lee's actually my favorite Dracula, because I grew up with that on TV as a kid. But you have, right, how are we going to bring him back now? How are we going to bring him back now? How are we going to bring him back now? And some of them are very inventive, but we wanted to do something that would have linked integrally to Bram Stoker's mythos, to his books. And when we looked at the White Worm, it really was a no-brainer, to have these cosmic entities, these cosmic gods, and use that sort of White Worm as a hook. And it also enabled us to push the story on a little bit, give Dracula different abilities and different sensitivities, and really create a well-rounded return for this literary character.
And Dacre, we talked about this at the comic shop event, the Dracula Fest. When Bram was writing Dracula, the world was just getting introduced to the literary concept of the franchise hero. And you brought up that Sherlock Holmes was, appearing in magazine stories that were recurring. But up until that point, you pretty much had a hero do something, and that was the end of the book. I mean, you'd have to go all the way back to ancient Greece for hey, here's the next exciting tale of Hercules and labor number 7. Gets a hero returning to do a different thing.
No, you're right, and I think Bram, as Chris said, would have capitalized on that. That's why the ending in the typescript was changed to a less definitive ending, and we've just played right in that hand. Just taken us 127 years to figure it out and to bring him back in the way that Bram would have done, and hopefully people will get with it, because we got a couple more grand to raise. And you can also, as you can see, some of the rewards in front of you, you can actually get edition number 1. There are some at stores, but this is an easy way to get 1 and 2 together. And also some really other cool things like, have dinner with me, have drinks with Chris, and get the retail package if you're a retail shop. So lots of good ways to get involved in this. Just one of the entry points into the Stokerverse. And Chris, let's talk. What are the names of I always mess up the artists. We've got Matt Sof.
We've got Chris Geary. Chris Geary. You got them 100%, mate. So the Chris Geary does the main artwork for the main strip. It's colored by Matt Sof. So these are stellar artists. I mean, that's a 2000 AD colorist, and then we have David Hitchcock, who's a 2000 AD artist. And it's his cover that you see on screen there. Is awesome. Right there. And that cover really shows the Stokerverse. So it's not just Dracula, right? Dracula's part of this extended monster universe that Dacre and I have created in so many different forms of media now. Mike Collins is another famous British artist, comic book artist. And I actually really like the black and white there. I think it really pops as much as
I love black and white.
The shading is so cool.
The shading's very gothic. You can see the shadows under the eyes, and it's beautiful. And this is as we said, the sort of mysterious and gruesome fourth bride, or fourth weird sister. So there's lots there in offer for everybody. And I don't know if you can bring it up, RJ, but the actual cover itself. If you can bring it up on the big screen, so not maybe the other one, the David Hitchcock version. I don't know if you have a large version of it that we can maybe look at.
I've got what's on the. I mean, if you've got a large version there, you're more than welcome to share your screen. I can bring you up.
I don't think I have. I don't. Yeah, my internet probably isn't great for sharing it. But that if folks go to Zoop and they see that David Hitchcock version. It's very, very powerful. And you can also have personalized sketch covers as well. So you can get personalized sketch covers from David and from Chris Geary.
And I'm posting that one. Like, follow me on Facebook, Dacre Stoker author. I'm always posting this one up on the post, because I mean, look,
beautiful.
I don't want to right now tell you which is my favorite, but that's the most recent one, with all the different heroes on. The mouth one is kind of gruesome to me. It looks so darn realistic. That's scary.
It does.
That's
Yeah.
Photograph.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh.
that's like a photograph. Like Tony's work's very realistic, and you're zooming in into the the mouth of Dracula. If you think Dracula is, yeah, it's like if you think Dracula is attractive, you have a look at that, and that's it. That's the teeth of a beast. That's the teeth of a wild animal. There, that's the teeth of something.
And it's not like snake fangs. That was one of the things in the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Might have been a later volume when Mina actually does take off the scarf around her neck. It's like hamburger meat on the side of her on the side of her neck, and she she like, what, you were expecting two neat little puncture holes. No, I was bitten and mauled by a vicious creature. So it would look like any other vicious mauling and biting by a vicious creature. So there are a number of things here you can get, folks, and of course there's variety of different covers for number 2. There's 4 different covers actually. You can, of course, get the catch-up reward. I don't need this one. I got number 1. I got it signed. But if you are being introduced to the Stokerverse for the first time, here's where to go, right here. You can get all 4 of the covers together. And then you've got some retailer bundles here. And we do know that retailers do like to pick these up. So you can, get a discount on, I don't know how many is in this bundle here. Let me click it and see. 10 copies. So,
it goes,
10
one goes 10, then you got 20, then you got 100.
I mean, if you're getting 100 for $600, that you're paying $6 a piece for this book. There's meat on the bone for you to resell this at the regular price of $15 or 10 if you want to just undercut him. But hey, you do you guys. And then you've got these add-ons here. Now, these are things that we have not looked at yet. This is is this number 1? What is this?
Yeah, that's a different. That's the deluxe edition. That's what I'm holding in front of me, of number 1 with extra content. Got extra stories in it. So I'm holding this up, and you've got some extra stories, extra scripts in here. What are we? Yeah, we got a Hitchcock in here too. So that's that again. This is why Scratch Comics is so cool. Is he gets the different artists to do different covers. Something for everybody, or we know many people that get all of them just because they can't decide.
Yeah, if you've got the money, folks, and I know a lot of you guys out there who get into crowdfunded comics really throw some money at the support of these characters and creators, and we'll show about you guys sometime because you're really unsung heroes. You've got some sketch covers here. You can get a David Hitchcock sketch cover. Not this specific one, unless you ask for it again, I guess. But I mean, is that how it works? Do you ask for what you want on it, or you just get a sketch?
Yeah, essentially, you ask for it. You ask for any character you want in a pose or a position. So, and it's the same with Chris's work as well, Chris Geary's work. So it's custom. If you're custom. If you're an ultimate Dracula collector, this is where you can have it. And I mean, we also have a tier where you can request yourself or a loved one to be either a vampire or getting bitten by a vampire, which is actually quite popular. The Bitten Commission, there you go. So there's 5 of them left.
I was looking at the prints there. So yeah, you got the Bitten Commission.
Yeah.
This is, as you said, somebody gets bitten by a vampire. Now, I don't. If I were a vampire, I don't know why I would ever go the route of turning someone, because you're basically creating competition for a limited food pool.
It's a good point, and I think whenever you look at something like 30 Days a Night, they don't really turn anybody in that. They just kill everybody, don't they? And that's what they say in 30 Days a Night. They do. It's, if you think of it as a contagion, like a plague, that at times there's a compulsion to do it because one vampire is easy to kill. 200 or 300 vampires and a network of vampires, and shall we say a vampire court, is different. And if you have 300 or 400 vampires networked together, undercover perhaps, or hiding within royalty, maybe, you can achieve global aims. So it's, the Dracula, there's the feral side of him, there's the animalistic beast, but I always liken him to a spider spinning web. He's a mastermind. And
of course,
the
that's
barrier,
vampire,
Yeah.
except you, then you're the monster, as we saw in I Am Legend.
right. Yeah.
I never figured out how come he was the monster. They were all scared of that one guy. I think it was I don't know. It was a metaphor of some kind. You can get an online Zoom lecture from Dacre, and I guess as many people as you want to cram into the room to
You could
watch
have a
this.
whole party. Yeah, I've had people say, "Hey, Dacre, could we get a dinner party and put you up on the big screen?" Absolutely. I do that for book clubs. For people for backers. So yeah, lot of fun to do that. Hey, there's one more thing to actually chat about tonight, RJ. Before we wrap up, Chris has some really interesting news about one other product in addition to this that is going to be coming out, and that's a video game.
Yeah.
It's not on crowdfunding. It's totally funded by the company. But do we have time, RJ, to show a little bit this demo of our?
I have nothing but time, and I have a 1-minute demo here that I'm just going to throw right up on the screen.
Oh, cool, good. And Chris can talk.
I'm really pleased that the reviewers have given it. It's been very positively received. So yeah, it's a Metroidvania style game. We start off in Dracula's castle as Jonathan Harker in the prologue that you see there, and then we move on. We move on to the trenches of World War One, and we start to push the Stokerverse into that time zone, and you'll find out what Dracula and all his creatures are doing there as you battle against them, and it adds a variety of characters. So that's a fun one, and there's actually going to be a physical cartridge release for the Game Boy Color that Dacre's going to sign. I've been told it's going to be in a coffin-shaped box with a silk lining, and there's going to be lots of extras in there as well. So yeah, due out. I think it's March time next year.
That would be very cool. Now, you also guys mentioned you had an RPG in development, or
It's out.
It's out.
Yeah, it's out. So the official Stokerverse RPG, it's best-selling RPG from Nightfall Games. This is the core book, beautifully illustrated by Clint Langley of Warhammer 40k and 2000 AD fame. Lots of information there. I call it like the encyclopedia of the Stokerverse, because you've got all the monsters and all sorts of things in there. We also have various side books that have been released. I think there's 5 of them so far. There's a Stokerverse storybook that has been released as well. It contains stories about Jack the Ripper and the various werewolf types and kinds that are in the Stokerverse. And this is the quick start, which allows you to play as one of the band of heroes after the novel of Dracula, but and slightly after the first issue of Dracula: The Return. So what we've done is we've built a congruent universe in a variety of multimedia items, products.
they all tie together?
So they all tie together. And we have more tabletop game products coming out next year as well. So that's very exciting. We also have a miniature war game like Warhammer that came out from Crooked Dice. War Games Illustrated last month showcased it, and it contains all your favorite Dracula characters and extras from Bram's notes, like ape creatures, and you'll meet those ape creatures also in issue 1 of Dracula Return, and various scenarios, one written by Dacre and myself, which features the ape creatures and Dracula and Harker attempting to escape the castle.
So these games, they come with miniatures, or is that
miniatures? You can buy the miniatures, buy the rule book, the miniatures, terrain, the whole 9 yards, and you can paint them any way you want.
So how does it end? And I don't mean how does Cult of the White Worm end. I mean, are you guys planning this to be a long running Dracula is just running rampant, or do you have okay, we didn't kill you right the first time, here's where you get it?
Right now there's no end in sight. Obviously what we're trying to do is exploit as best we can in a tasteful manner, Bram's original ideas, and keep them going. We have everything we've talked about tonight. We haven't yet talked about film. We haven't talked about, I take people on tours. We do have some feelers in the world of film, both documentaries as well as series and things, television. So that is, being explored. So who knows where it's going to end? I think we will know when our readership and people who have had enough, when they stop wanting more, we'll know. But right now we're just keeping it creative, and there's plenty more material where all this stuff came from within the notes, and even with Bram's other stories. As we said, there are other horrific stories that we're going to bring alive in the Stokerverse. It's not all just Dracula.
Yeah, I'm very keen to emphasize that, because Bram didn't just write Dracula. Bram was the Neil Gaiman of his day. Bram wrote fantasy, he wrote serious drama. Yes, he wrote horror. He was a painter, he was an illustrator, he was a theater manager, he was a theater critic. He was many things. His talent with creativity was unrestricted. When it comes to the Stokerverse, we do have a plan. These aren't just little random stories that we're bringing out. There's a structure, there's a timeline with that suit the various genres that we're working in, whether it's games, television, books, audios. There's a clear structure. So, probably end of next year, we will produce a little map that kind of shows people where it all ties in with the timeline. The stories set in between the original novel, stories set after it. So, all of that sort of stuff. We'll probably produce a map that gives people easy access to the Stokerverse. But if you just like comic books, Dracula Return, issues 1 to are planned 4, will give you the complete story after the novel and reveal things about the characters, such as the Coachman. So traditionally, the Coachman is the same character as Dracula. And when I say traditionally, I mean cinematically. That's not the case. Coachman's actually a different character. He's got his own storyline. He's got his own reasons for being there and for helping Dracula. In Bram's original notes, the castle was not empty. There were servants. There there. There were the ape creatures. There was satanic sacrifice. There was all sorts of stuff going on in there that we're drawing from. But you can only see
kinds of evil.
Yeah, a lot of evil. I mean, there's no redeeming characteristics of Dracula at all. But I mean, there's lots of redeeming characteristics for the characters around him. This is the important thing to know about the heart of the Dracula stories or Dracula mythos from Bram Stoker. Very, very clearly, there's moments of light. There are people of light who penetrate the darkness. That's hope and faith. Dracula embodies the worst, the absolute worst evil. But he is always challenged by people who have hope and people who have faith. It's a very powerful story.
Is there anything in the notes that indicates that Bram might have considered all of these stories to be existing in the same universe? I don't know if a universe was even a literary concept at the time.
No, it wasn't. He just had he had about 4 iterations of the novel, all tied up in the notes with many different characters that you could see as he started whittling it down and getting closer to a final version. That these characters, were reduced, and the locations where he's holding the story were now being reduced, changed based on where he went in real life, because a lot of things about the novel were based on him going to these places like Whitby, Exeter, Purfleet, throughout different places in London, and so he'd been to a lot of these places. So he had a lot of these sort of far-reaching tentacles, and then it just got narrowed down. So that's why it's easy for us to sort of touch on all these things, because he started from such a broad base.
You talked about mapping things out and bringing in other Victorian characters, other public domain characters that fit into the Stokerverse flavor. I'm kind of reminded of something Philip Jose Farmer did, where he talked about the Wold Newton universe. And I guess Wold Newton was like an area in England where this meteorite crashed. And for whatever reason, it affected people around it and their families. And he's like got the spider web of drawing lines from like Tarzan to Doc Savage to Sherlock Holmes to just, and showing how they were all interrelated. Are you going as widespread as that as this goes outward?
Well, we look at the themes of Bram's work. So, for example, Jewel of Seven Stars is one of his cosmic horror pieces. We talk about Lovecraft. Very few people look at Bram Stoker as a cosmic horror writer, but he was. Jewel of Seven Stars is that. And we can look at, we take that, and we have written a prequel to that. We've used parts of that in the RPG, and we use that to explain what exactly Dracula was looking for in Carfax Abbey. So that's one example of that. And we take an element of that, we take an element of the Jewel of Seven Stars, put it into Dracula, and we're able to then create a prequel that ties into the original novel, but then obviously ties into the Stokerverse. That's not a wild conjecture. Are we going to start making wild conjectures? No. But are we going to try and put a congruent path through Bram's other works? And the reason we do this as well is to preserve that, again, to go back to Bram didn't just write Dracula. If we write a prequel to Jewel of Seven Stars, people who haven't read Jewel of Seven Stars go, oh, that's really cool. Let's pick this book up. Let's read it. Let's learn more about Bram's other works. And this is when we say we're creating an authentic Stokerverse. This is part of it. That it all gets... He wrote
12 other novels, or 12 novels total, and 17 or 18 short stories, lots of articles. So that's the spider web we're sort of talking about, where we can touch on these.
You're going to be able to
things.
connect all of them at some.
Yeah, I mean, if it meant right, if it works right, we're not going to force it, but if it works right, we will. That's the sandbox we play in.
Yeah, there's one really cool thing we did, Dacre, in Virgin's Embrace. So Virgin's Embrace is set in Nuremberg. The order of Dracula was given to, was it Sigmund's second in Nuremberg. And we put a little hint of that, a little reference in that in one of the panels. So if you're a Dracula fan, a fan of Dracula history, we tie things like that in as well. So that there's more, we build more substance, and we give, the dedicated Dracula fan a little smile as well,
And it's where Bram and Florence had their honeymoon. So, there's lots of realistic connections we're throwing in there.
You do this enough, people are going to forget that it's fiction, and they're going to treat it like a biopic.
All the better yet. That's where horror is more horrifying, is when you have a feeling that it's real, just like the novel Dracula had the impact that way on people.
I want you to believe in things that you cannot.
Well, I believe 7 impossible things before breakfast every day, so we're off to a good start. Gentlemen, thank you so much. This has been illuminating, enlightening, and I think we could probably go on for another hour just talking about vampire lore and the notes that you guys have got to work from and what you're going to do with this. But it's late, and it's later for others. So we're going to end it up here. So I just want to thank you guys for coming on.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you for your
want-
interest. Absolutely. And you can go to stokerverse.com to see what Chris and I are up to and some of the products. And my wife and I run BramStokerEstate.com. You can see, stories about Bram, all his family, cool things we're doing there.
And if you guys, ever want to decide to come back for, the next book or some other project, you know how to reach us. We'd be glad to have you guys on at any time.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Folks in the chat, thank you so much for being here tonight. We don't have a show without you guys. We're just a podcast falling in the woods. So we are very grateful you're here. And of course, while you were here, as always, we just hope you had a blast. Good night, everybody.